Welcome back to the course, and during this lesson we are going to continue our discussion on strings by focusing on string comparison. During this lesson we'll discuss the following topics: compare strings using the equals and equalsIgnoreCase methods, and compare strings using the equals operator and the compareTo method. First and foremost, it's important to note that when comparing strings in Java, you cannot use the equals operator as you would with other data types. This is because when using the equals operator with strings, it checks if the two references are pointing to the same string object in memory, not if the contents of the two strings are equal. So, how do we compare the contents of two strings in Java? That's where the two methods we are going to discuss today come into play: the equals and equalsIgnoreCase methods. Let's start with the equals method. This method is used to compare the contents of two string objects. It returns a Boolean value of true if the contents of both strings are equal, and false if they are not. So here you can see a code example to illustrate its usage. In this example, both string1 and string2 contain the same string hello. When we use the equals method to compare the two, it returns true, and we get the output both strings are equal because we also use if-else statement here. So if this condition is true, then the following string will be printed to the console. Otherwise, the following. And in our case, both strings are equal. So here, the statement will be true, and the following will be printed to the console. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that both strings are equal. Next, we have the equalsIgnoreCase method. As the name suggests, this method is used to compare two strings while ignoring the case of the characters in the string. Just like the equals method, it returns a Boolean value of true if the contents of the two strings are equal, ignoring the case, and false if they are not. And here is an example to show the usage. In this example, string1 contains the string hello, and string2 contains the string hello starting from the lowercase letter. As you can see, the case of the characters in both strings are different. When we use the equalsIgnoreCase method to compare them, it returns true, and we get the output both strings are equal. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, so we can see that both strings still equal. In conclusion, when comparing strings in Java, it's important to use the equals or equalsIgnoreCase method instead of the equals operator. These methods allow you to compare the contents of two strings instead of just their references. Let's now look how to compare strings using the equals operator. So, when we use the equals operator to compare two string variables, it checks if they are referring to the same object in memory. In other words, it checks if they are pointing to the same address in the heap memory. So here's an example, and in this example, string1 and string2 are pointing to the same object in memory. So the output will be the strings are equal. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, we can see that the strings are equal. Now let's talk about the compareTo method. This method compares the lexicographic order of the two strings. It returns an integer value where 0 means that two strings are equal, A positive value means that the first string is greater than second, and the negative value means that the first string is less than the second. So here's an example. In this example, string 1 and string 2 are equal. So the output will be the strings are equal. Let's run the program and see the output. Okay, we can see that the strings are equal. Let's now update string 1 to A, string 2 to B, and rerun the program. Now we see that the first string is less than the second. This is because compareTo compares the lexicographic order of two strings. So let's update string 1 to B and string 2 to A and rerun the program. And now we can see that the first string is greater than the second. That's it for this lesson. Thank you for attention and see you on the next one. Bye.